non-discriminatory rates and services to entities that provide electric vehicle charging services, and prohibiting any costs and expenses associated with retail electric suppliers, electric vehicle charging stations from being recovered in electric rates. So for the bill overview, we got Mr. Nick Myers, Assistant Revisor, Office of Revisor of Statutes. Nick, as always, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, committee members. Okay, so committee, as the chair kind of provided the overview, I'll just get right into this bill. As the chair said, this bill deals with electric vehicle charging stations and how public utilities treat essentially privately owned electric vehicle charging stations and the services. So what this bill would do is it would apply to specifically to retail electric suppliers is what the term is in the bill. And this is generally your electric public utilities. So if a retail electric supplier, one of these utilities owns, operates, or maintains their own electric vehicle fast charging station, which is also defined in the bill, this would require that public utility to offer fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory rates and services to entities that provide similar electric vehicle charging services. And it would also prohibit the utility from providing an unreasonable competitive advantage toward their own electric vehicle charging stations. And as the chairman said, additionally, this bill would prohibit any retail electric supplier from including the cost or expenses for their own EV stations in the rate base of the public utility. So essentially that means that it will not be recovered in rates through retail ratepayers. This bill would not apply to specific charging stations that an electric utility owns. So if a station was constructed prior to July 1, 2026, this bill would not apply to those stations, and it would also not apply to stations that are only for kind of the private, that utility's private purposes. So if the utility has EV charging stations for their electric vehicle fleet or for their employees, this would not apply to those stations as long as they're not made available for public use. And I did note that the bill defines the terms electric vehicle, fast charging station, and retail electric supplier within the bill. This bill would take effect on July 1, 2026 if enacted. And Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Okay. Committee, we have any questions at this point? Okay, Senator Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick, line 14, you know, the behind the meter has a definite definition in my head. Is it just because the IOU owns that charger that it is like unmetered because it's theirs, or?
So I believe what this is getting at is a station that would be behind somebody's electric meter. So let's say a convenience store is offering an electric vehicle charging station. The service from that the public utility would provide would go to that convenience store's electric meter, and then that station, that EV charging station, would be behind the meter on that property. So I think that's what this is getting at. So those behind the meter fast charging stations.
Chairman, maybe, you know, when we're talking about like data centers and they have their own generation that's behind the meter, at least in my mind, so it's a little confusing because that's on the meter, right, at that convenience store.
So yeah, I think you're thinking kind of the renewable energy, yeah. Like, I mean, net metering or parallel generation statutes. Yes, that would be behind the meter. So the residential customer that has rooftop solar on their roof, the meter would, you know, the electric service would come to the meter, but the solar rooftop stuff would be behind the meter and be generating power, and you'd have the bidirectional meter that is exporting energy back to the grid as appropriate. But this is, I think, getting at the charging stations that are on somebody's property behind their meter, and they're offering electric vehicle charging services through their kind of retail electric service.
Okay, and I remember some testimony from last year regarding that. Thank you for your answer, Nick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in reading this, I'm assuming it is only the fast charging stations. So you still can have other charging stations that are public and that deliver electricity to cars. It's just
So, yeah.
worried about the speed.
So, yeah, and like Senator Clifford was getting at, that definition of fast charging station, it means behind the meter EV charging equipment that's capable of delivering, you can see in the bill, 50 kW or greater at a voltage of 200 volts or greater. So this would be specific to the provision of those charging stations, and the provisions of this bill would apply to those specific charging stations. Yes, you're correct, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for presenting all of that. I looked it over, and I see that the bill obviously establishes that the non-discrimination rate-based prohibitions, but it doesn't specify enforcement that I could see. I mean, it seems like the KCC obviously is going to be over the public utilities, but under the cooperatives, how would that be dealt with? It doesn't appear there's any jurisdiction over that.
I think that's a good question. And yeah, your distinction is correct. KCC would be overseeing their jurisdictional utilities. KCC does not have jurisdiction over electric cooperatives who have opted out of the jurisdiction, or municipal utilities. And this does, retail electric supplier under the bill, the definition is broad. I mean, it captures any type of retail electric utility. So I think the enforcement way, if one of these entities that's offering electric vehicle charging services believes that something is discriminatory or violating this bill, most likely they're going to bring some type of, get an attorney involved and bring some type of suit against a public utility, would be my guess. Or a demand letter or something like that. You're discriminating against my charging service in violation of Senate Bill 380, and seeking kind of some recourse through that mechanism.
So it's civil only if you're a cooperative, and then it's KCC if you're not. Is that
Well, it might be.
I'm not a lawyer, so you have to explain this to me.
Yeah, and I mean, under this bill, the KCC isn't necessarily specified as to what any role that they have. I mean, they're going to be monitoring their jurisdictional utilities, and then when the rate cases come, they're going to be evaluating what the rates and service they're providing under EV tariffs and things like that. But still, if somebody feels like it's discriminatory, there might be a kind of.
I'm left thinking this is toothless. Am I way off base saying that or not?
Well, I mean, this would be the law, so I don't know that it's toothless.
Okay.
I mean, this would impose this as a law, and so I think there might be some, some ways to.
Civil. It's mainly civil. Is that?
Yeah. Yes, it would be some type of civil action.
All right. Thank you.
Good question, committee. Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Nick.
You're welcome.
Okay, we will move at this point to proponents oral. We've got a Mr. Ted Augustine, president of Triplet, Inc. If you step forward and introduce yourself and make sure the microphone's on, and welcome to committee.
Chairman Vag and Senators, appreciate you having me here today. Good afternoon. My name is Ted Augustine, president of 24/7 Travel Stores, headquartered in Salina, Kansas. We have 10 travel centers. We're working on breaking ground on number 11 in Hays, Kansas, so trying to continue to expand. We have brought EV chargers into the marketplace at multiple locations. We currently have 6 locations with EV chargers, 7 locations with EV chargers, 5 of those owned by us. So we've made some significant investments in EV charging, multi-$100,000 investments, small company, 140 employees, working to recover our investment, but also looking to provide a service for the traveling public, right? We don't just service gasoline vehicles. We service truck drivers, regular four-wheel drivers, and now EV drivers. And we want them to be able to stop with us and fuel with us. We did get to work over between this session and last on negotiating the bill and trying to find common ground between us and the utilities. And I think we were very successful on that. We did back off on the demand charges. So one of the original asks was that we create rates without demand charges. It's very difficult to parse out a demand charge over infrequent demand. But we did go ahead and move past that, understood what the utility's concern and remove that from our ask. We also removed the separate subsidiary ask. So we've made some pretty significant compromises. We are looking for certainty in our utility rate in the base, right? So looking to make sure we have a level playing field. There has been some discussion on a possible sunset. That does present some concern to me, given that the marketplace is young. And the point of this bill is to encourage investment, private investment in EV charging so that we can establish a marketplace. It's well known that EV drivers have a tendency not to buy EVs if they do not have the service. And in order to expand that marketplace, the services need to be provided. And so even a 10-year sunset, that marketplace is still going to be fairly young. The replacement rate of EVs versus gas vehicles is roughly 7% a year. That's declining given the current administration. EVs are roughly 3 to 4% of vehicles on the road, so it's a very slow progression. But we do see charging. We do charge quite a few vehicles. It's not hundreds of vehicles a day like we do for gasoline, but it's 2, 3, 4 vehicles a day that utilize our services at each of those stations. So I urge the committee to, so I'm a proponent of it, urge the committee to approve Senate Bill 380. And I'll open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Questions from the committee? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the things when you're talking about what can be put in the rates, you're saying that none of the cost can be recovered in the rates for an electric supplier. How would that work if, you know, some of the cost is going to be oversight, administration? How do you parse out all those costs and get them assigned responsibly?
So is this in context if the utilities would like to construct their own chargers, or if a private business is constructing chargers? If it's the utility constructing chargers, our ask is that they can't rate base anything behind the meter. So that would be the switch gear, that would be the DC to AC to DC conversion tower, that would be the actual dispenser. There's several $100,000s of expense there, even supplying 2 charging points when it's high capacity DC fast charging. So when you start to get up above 50, 100, 200, 400 kilowatts even are today's chargers. It's quite a bit of power, and that there's a lot of cost in that infrastructure. For the utility company, if we compromise and allow them to put that in the rate, essentially rate base that, or even collect it at the meter for that charging station. And we're asking for a non-discriminatory rate. If the rate that they design for EV charging includes the cost of that infrastructure, and I have access to that same rate, and that's the rate that I get applied, it means that they're essentially making a return on my investment in the DC fast charger, right? Because that base rate includes then that infrastructure behind the meter. And if I'm charged that same rate, I still have to mark it up to recover my multi-$100,000 investment. So therein lies the concern is we need a mechanism to recover our investment, but also create a level playing field between us and the utilities. And that's always a difficult proposition when it's a public utility in a free market. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my concern is this talks about any costs or expenses, not just infrastructure.
There's still, you know, as is tradition, that up to the meter, right? Them bringing the meter to us, which we've worked with them on multiple cases, 7 different locations, right? And they've dropped that meter and provided the transformer and the meter, and then we've taken it from there. There's no oversight after the meter for me. I can't speak for their installation. I'll let them expand on that themselves. But for me, there's no additional cost for them after the meter. I'm providing that. I'm providing the switch gear. I'm providing the project management, you know, that we're providing that investment.
Committee, any other questions? Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for being here. If this was mentioned earlier and I missed it, my apologies. Could you provide clarification from your standpoint on the differences of this bill compared to, I know you were here last year?
Yeah, so last year we had in there that we were requesting rates be designed for EV charging without demand charges. So we removed that from the bill, from our ask. And the reason we asked for that is because I may some months have 50 customers. In other months I might have 5. Between the 5 and the 50, if I hit peak power at 400 kilowatts, even if it's 5 customers or 50 customers, I get a demand charge for that peak power. And so that's really hard to average out and be fair to the customer and still make a return because that flow is so transient between summer and winter, between holidays. So I've backed into a rate the best I can and averaged out demand charges for me to try to make a return. For the most part, currently, we're breaking even on our electricity rates, but that was the concern for the demand charge. We have removed that, and we also removed the ask for separate subsidiary. So separate subsidiary was so that we could provide a base rate that everybody had access to at the meter, including Evergy, and then anything after that would have to be purchased in a separate subsidiary and the cost recovered there. Without that separate subsidiary, it gets a little. So your question, Senator, that is part of the confusion, right? The separate subsidiary helps clarify that they recover those costs in that entity, not in the public utility. But we did remove that as well per their request.
Any other questions? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It almost feels like, looking at this, that supplying an EV charging station is more of a loss leader than anything. I mean, it's like you got to have one for somebody who comes on by, but if I were a business guy, I'm not so sure I would provide them. It sounds like you're losing money on the deal.
We aren't currently losing money, not on an OpEx standpoint.
Okay.
So on an operating expense day to day, we're not losing money. Am I making a decent return on the chargers? No. Honestly, no, I'm not. I am making a small return, but we're trying to play the long game. Not everybody's willing to do that. We're trying to learn our lessons as we go, right? The market evolves, the equipment changes, what the consumer wants changes, and getting a base understanding of that marketplace to us is important because we think that marketplace is coming. But you're correct. It is not a lucrative game.
That's kind of the sense I got. So you're almost doing it as a charity at this point, it sounds like to me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any other questions for Ted? Okay, thank you, Ted. Thank you for being here. Next, we got a proponent, that's Brian Postler, the Executive Director of Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience. Please make sure the button's on for me, Brian, and introduce yourself and welcome to the committee.
All right. Good afternoon, committee. I am Brian Postler. I serve as the Executive Director of Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience. We are the nonprofit statewide trade association that represents the independent Kansas energy distribution companies like TED, as well as the voice of over 2,000 retail locations providing fuel throughout Kansas. So Chairman Fagg and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony to you today in support of SB 380. Chairman, I want to add an extra thanks to you for insisting that all the parties work diligently. Since I was here last year on the previous version of this bill, you encouraged us all to sit down together and to work out our differences, and it has been a long but wonderful process. I'm very pleased all the parties were able to come to the table, all able to negotiate in good faith and try to get to an agreement where we at least got the opponents to neutral. And so to me, that's a big win. And so we come to you today with a better bill that hopefully will be an easier vote for all of you than we had in front of you last year. You do have my written testimony in front of you. Ted did a great job outlining some of the main arguments. So instead of reading that statement, I'll just provide you with this. You as regulators have a tough job. You have to adhere to free market principles, but you also have to discern where to put up the guardrails and boundaries to ensure that that market remains healthy, functional, and fair, and to allow competition so that the citizens remain protected from undue monopolies. The moment we are in with the development of high-speed chargers is an important one for our industry. The state needs to see this charging network continue to expand, Senator, even though right now it's not hugely profitable as an undertaking. We've got to have the network expand so that this technology of the future can develop. These chargers have high upfront costs, and retailers are currently often very hesitant to invest due to the lack of legal certainty that Kansas's EV charging market will be based on a level playing field. We can't spend many thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars on a charger if we face the prospect that a huge competitor can later undercut us on prices and make our business model entirely untenable. So back in the early 2000s, I'm going to give you an analogy. There was a moment where some big box stores decided to begin selling fuel in the state. They could come into a town, build a bunch of pumps, and because they made plenty of their revenue selling TVs, food, pharmacy, all sorts of other products, they could actually afford to sell fuel at a loss, undercutting the market, just so they could get customers in the door who are then going to buy all their other products, right? That's really hard on the main street retailers who are trying to make a living just selling fuel. And so, and if it happened to bankrupt some of those small mom and pop gas stations, so much the better, because with those family businesses gone, then the big box stores would have the opportunity to charge much higher margins in the future and essentially have a monopoly in a community. That fair market was threatened, right? The state at that time wisely stepped in, adding guardrails to prevent any unfair monopolies. And in 2004, this legislature passed laws stating that no retailer could sell fuel at a loss in this state. Now, size and scale certainly still brings advantages, but competition remains possible with that prohibition. That's an example of a guardrail you can put in place to try to protect the marketplace and make sure it remains competitive and viable and healthy for all concerned. I argue that this is a similar moment. We cannot allow all ratepayers to subsidize the creation of charging stations so that they are selling charges for cars at retail for less money than my members have to pay for their incoming electric supply. You see how that could work, right? That's not a fair and competitive marketplace if that were to occur. Now, I'm reassured by all our conversations with the utilities, they have no intention of doing that, but even the option that that could happen sometime in the future is enough to put some fear into retailers who don't want to make that huge multi-$100,000 upfront investment without some certainty that they can be protected from something like that down the road. And so that's why it's imperative that the legislature enact this legislation to create that level playing field for EV fast charging that promotes private investment and still maintains free market competition. Now, establishing a level playing field will ensure the Kansas EV market develops in a way that doesn't place the cost burden on utility taxpayers, ratepayers, many of whom do not own an EV and who would not want to voluntarily pay their utility company to build out electric chargers in the first place. So it's better for the ratepayers, it's better for the marketplace, and it's better for that certainty that will spur private investment and develop these networks the way the state has a vested interest in doing. So for these reasons, my members support SB 380. We ask that you vote to report it out favorably. So again, thank you for pushing all the concerned parties together to compromise. We feel like we gave a lot over the last year on the compromise front, and we feel really good about where we've landed, and we hope that'll be something that all of you can support. So with that, I will yield to questions.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Brian. Couldn't a big retailer still find a way to undercut the price for smaller guys? I mean, this, to me, by limiting your small guys from being able to charge a little extra to cover their costs of construction, they're still going to have trouble competing with those big guys who might want to put in 15 or 20 charging stations and eat the cost of the demand charge and still undercut you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we face one of the most competitive marketplaces of any industry. And, you know, we're the only industry I know that's foolish enough to put our prices in 3-foot-high numbers out at the street, right? So everyone knows exactly, am I going here or am I going across the street there, right? So we have a very competitive marketplace that we already have to deal with. And certainly size matters in industry. That's why we see all the consolidation that we're seeing. We see the Buc-ee's come in with hundreds of pumps. We see, you know, bigger and bigger C-stores all the time. So we're used to dealing with all that competition. What we want to avoid is just a situation where not only do I have to beat the competitor across the street who might be bigger than me, but I also have to compete against an entity that can spread their costs out over all ratepayers, regardless of whether those ratepayers care anything about electric vehicles or not. That's the problem we're trying to address.
So in other words, somebody with economies of scale, if they were able to charge those extra fees to cover their costs, could spread it out, still keep their prices lower than yours.
So at least this way, with this bill, we know that the capital expenditures have to be part of the equation rather than taken completely out of the equation, which is the fear that we have.
Okay. I think that clears it up. I was kind of wondering about it, so thank you.
All right, we're going to have to keep moving here. Brian, thank you for being here. Next, we have Robert Barata, Americans for Affordable Clean Energy. Robert, if you can kind of keep that to a couple minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think most of his comments
Well, thank you. That's keeping it short, isn't it? Okay. Okay, so we got proponents written, which is Larry Ann Brown, Charter Head Partnership in Kansas. You'll find that in your file. So now we'll move to neutral oral. We got Reagan McLeod, Director of Government Relations, Kansas Electric Cooperatives. Reagan, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I know we're kind of pressed on time here, so I'll try to keep it fairly quickly because I think a lot of the things in my written testimony are similarly addressed by the other neutral conferees from the utilities industry on this issue. I am going to focus most of my testimony on the proposed amendment that I put into the legislation. But just to give some quick context, I think that the proponents accurately addressed that there was a lot of work in the off-season that was done between the utilities industry and the proponents of this legislation to try to find a middle ground, and they are correct that we moved from an opponent to a neutral position. I will kind of focus my testimony mostly, at least on the oral side of things. I encourage you to read my written testimony as well, but the 5-year sunset provision that we've proposed as an amendment to this legislation. I am not clairvoyant. I've got to wait for the future just like anybody else can. But my prediction is that, similar to what the proponents said, this is a early industry, one that's developing. And so I think that actually kind of tends itself towards this idea of a 5-year sunset provision to see progress and doesn't argue against it. I consider myself, again, I'm not perfect at predicting, kind of like a weatherman, although I choose those words carefully because we are in the presence of the one weatherman who was never incorrect in any predictions. But my prediction is that, again, I can't predict the future on this industry, and I think that in a 5-year period, if this legislation has its stated intended effect, which is something we agree with, which is a positive impact on developing EV infrastructure throughout the state. I'm kind of focusing more on the rural side, but we agree on that ultimate outcome. If progress is not shown by the positive effects of this legislation within 5 years, then I think it gives a natural off-ramp for the legislature to look at alternative methods to reach that ultimate goal. Again, we all agree on what the intended outcome is. I don't think that a 5-year sunset fundamentally alters the impact of the legislation. It just requires a 5-year opportunity to show that the impact is what was intended by the proponents of the legislation. And hopefully in 5 years, they can come before this committee and brag about the successes of it. In terms of the amendment that is proposed, we have worked with the revisor's office, and I want to give a big round of applause, to the you've got some superstars that work on the energy committees with us on this. I address a couple things in my testimony about some perceived vagueness in the legislation. After a couple more readings, it turns out that Nick Myers is a better attorney than me, and he wrote it perfectly. So a lot of those concerns in my testimony, you can probably disregard. I just think that overall, I know the other neutral conferees will talk a little bit more about the technicals of the legislation, but the 5-year sunset does not fundamentally alter the impact. We hope that the impact is positive. Let's just see in 5 years if they can prove progress and brag in front of this committee about the progress that's intended. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will step aside and answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Reagan. Committee, you got any questions for Reagan? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, we have Nick Vortis. He's Director of Energy Solutions, Evergy. Yes. Oh, we did? Okay, I'm sorry. Who did? Joe? No, We'll go ahead if you want to. Oh, Senator, okay. You did? You sure?
I was just going to make a snide remark about,
Oh, okay.
hey, thank you,
We'll
Mr.
we'll
Chair.
save that for the end then.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Am I up?
Do you want to ask a question to
Yeah.
those here?
And I'll yield the floor for the snide remark also.
Okay. All right, if you don't mind, Nick, we'll, real quick here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't get my arm out there far enough. So, looking at Western Kansas in particular and having owned an EV and, the incentive to build a fast charger out in Western Kansas. I know that we have our friend from Salina here. I wouldn't consider Salina Western Kansas. One thing you learn in Kansas is that Western Kansas is everything west than wherever you're at. So I'm thinking of the actual Western Kansas out there. And I guess the concern that I would probably have is disincentivizing building those by the electrical cooperatives. Do you see any aspect of this making it difficult for you to take that on and do it? And if so, is there something we could do, like, for example, if a private entity doesn't build one within, I don't know, I think Georgia has this, a certain amount of time that the electrical system can come in and go ahead and claim that space and do whatever they need to put a charger in there instead of a private entity. Thank you.
Sure. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Clays. I addressed some of this in my written testimony, and I had put in my notes as well. A lot of those concerns from last year's legislation were pertaining to some of the efforts that our members have done to put in things like chargers at their co-op headquarters as a member benefit, and those were addressed in this legislation. So I don't think there's any disincentive for our members to install these if they see, it as a member benefit or to provide, a benefit to their members. However, I do think that, the concept of trying to expand charging infrastructure in Western Kansas is something we're certainly paying attention to, representing over 80% of the state's landmass. It's something that we're aware of. I think that kind of testifies towards the benefit of a 5-year sunset to see if this legislation has its intended impact, which is incentivizing or at least making fair, the build out of EV infrastructure. I'm focused on rural Kansas. I know other conferees will talk more about the urban and suburban areas. If it doesn't have its intended effect, then after that 5-year off ramp, we can see, did this have the impact it was supposed to? And if it didn't, what else can we do? Hopefully that answers your question, and thank you for it.
Thank you, Reagan.
Thank you, Mr.
I know we got some more questions, but we need to keep moving here, so. Okay. Nick, I'm sorry. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of
bet.
the committee, for allowing me to speak to you today. My name is Nick Voris. I haven't been in front of you guys. I'm the Director of Energy Solutions at Evergy, and in that capacity, I oversee our electric vehicle-related programs and strategy. With respect to Senate Bill 380, we're neutral. We recognize there's been a ton of good work done on this bill since it appeared last year. I believe it was 167 last year, and as a result, today I'm just going to be talking about kind of a narrow range of interests, that being making sure that going forward we have the right tools in place as EV adoption evolves. But I first want to begin by just making it super clear that Evergy does not aspire to be the Quick Trip of EV charging. We actually looked out into our service area and we started counting charging stations. And we counted over 200 charging stations that are similar to those contemplated in this bill within our service area today. Evergy owns 10 of those, 10 out of over 200. So if we were aspiring to be the Quick Trip of EV charging stations, we're doing a terrible job thus far. In 2021, we were in front of our commission talking about a rebate program that was ultimately approved, and that rebate program is available to folks like those in the room who aspire to install public charging in our service area. We have a rebate for them. But as part of that docket, we spent a lot of time talking to the commission and to interveners about what is the right role for utilities in this space. The entire industry is grappling with it. And then the commission order from that docket, we received a clear set of criteria that essentially establish Evergy as the provider of last resort with respect to EV charging in areas that we refer to as underserved, in areas that are underserved with respect to EV charging. Subject to that criteria, we have not built a single station in the last 5 years. We've been wholly focused on supporting non-utility entities as they install chargers, and there's been a bunch of them installed in the last 5 years. The Ionas, the Teslas, the Rivians have all come in and installed literally dozens and dozens of chargers during the ensuing 5 years, some of whom taking advantage of our rebate, some of whom not. All that said, the reality is that the developers that we work with are primarily interested in areas where the economics are strongest, right? And you contrast that with Evergy, a regulated utility. We have a mandate to serve all customers, and we think that that's the crux of the issue. The last 2 years have shown a dramatic swing with respect to the EV landscape. Who's to say what happens in the future? We want to avoid a situation where the Kansas Commission is categorically prohibited from even considering a utility solution as they tackle underserved areas with respect to EV charging. And I just want to say one more minute on the prudency criteria that the commission provided for us. Evergy must still justify its investments in a future rate case. I can go out, build a station on August 1 that I believe meets the criteria. I still have to go in front of the commission in a general rate case and justify that investment to the commission and to anybody who wants to intervene. It's not a rubber stamp. We're not talking about rubber stamping a build out. We're certainly not talking about rubber stamping cost recovery. We're simply talking about preserving an arrow that is currently in the commission's quiver that they can use or not use to address underserved areas with respect to charging at some point in the future if they deem that in the public interest. The last thing that I would say is on a sunset, we heard just about a 5-year sunset. If that is the direction that this committee wants to go, Evergy would certainly be on board with that. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Okay, committee, got any questions? Senator Claes.
It's actually the same question for, that I had for the cooperatives. Is there anything about this bill that you feel like in any way disincentivizes you from building your own charges? You know, as you know, has been noted, you know, there are a lot of gaps out there. I can attest to them myself, having owned a electric vehicle, and you know, anything that slows that down, I feel like is something that we want to probably try to address if that is indeed the issue, and if the issue is because of something to do with this legislation where you know you can't do the rate-based version of it or whatever. Again, I don't really understand some of this stuff to the level you do, but if there's anything like that, I mean, I'm just curious if there is, and better understand that. Thank you.
I don't think so. I think that our primary guardrails are provided by the commission, and this if you leave those guardrails in place, then I think that this bill is with a sunset provision is a good place to be.
Senator Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder, we heard from a proponent that it might take 10 years to really see this through for private industry. And I'm wondering, would the thought be, when we work this bill, a review at 5 years so we don't sunset existing law versus a sunset of the actual law? Do you have any thoughts of where Evergy might land on that difference? And I haven't talked to the revisor about the technical differences, but I'd like to hear what you say.
So help me understand the nuance between a 5-year sunset.
A review would keep existing law in place. A sunset this would be gone.
As I stand here today, I'm going to lean sunset, but I'm not close to the 5-year review.
Thank you, and I'll probably talk to the reviser, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
And that's something, when we go to, if we work the bill, that would be something to look at, so. Okay, is there anybody else from the committee? All right, thank you very much, Nick. Next, we got Kimberly Jinker Swati, Kansas Municipal Utilities. Kimberly, welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Kimberly Genscher-Swati, and I'm pleased to appear before you today on behalf of all the municipally owned electric, natural gas, water, and wastewater utilities, although for the purposes of today, I'm only focusing on the electric side of the equation, where we represent communities all across the state in virtually every single county in the state, from the city of Radium with 8 meters to Kansas City Board of Public Utilities that serves 67,000 customers. So the range is very real. And we do want to thank the proponents of the bill for working very closely with us over the course of the last several months as we look to refine last year's legislation. And so KMU is testifying neutral on Senate Bill 380. But I think it's important to understand there's been a couple of questions asked, and so I'd like to maybe deviate a little bit from my testimony and more answer some of those questions. So when I think about the last 5 years and I think about EV charging, I think about Super Bowl commercials 3 years ago when literally every other commercial was about an electric vehicle. There was more money spent in those Super Bowl ads on EVs than anything else. And I think that was absolutely a sign of the time. The federal government had just infused money into rebates or other federal programs to encourage the deployment of electric vehicles. And that was a decision of the federal government, so I'm not going to opine at all on any of that. But what I will say is that during that time period, Kansas Municipal Utilities worked with the Kansas Department of Transportation on identifying our transportation corridors and trying to figure out if there's a way that we can take the grant money that's coming down as well from the federal government to encourage EV deployment, and how do we put, we as in take advantage of the grant money and deploy EV charging stations, not necessarily even fast charging station, but just EV charging in key community points around the state near parks and other tourist attractions to drive up the amount of investment that people are spending when they are parking for EV. And we did get to work very closely with our friends at 24/7 when we were part of the hydrogen hub effort, because we also did become a state recognized for the hydrogen fuel corridor as well. And 24/7, to their point exactly about innovation and trying to provide a point of differentiation within that highly competitive business market. That was a business choice that they made to want to partner with the state and with the Department of Transportation and with the Department of Energy to be that hydrogen fuel cell point of fueling. And so, I mean, that's absolutely commendable, and that is exactly how you differentiate yourselves within that competitive marketplace. But on behalf of the municipal utilities who actually house, whether it's Goodland or Colby or McPherson, now Russell, we actually house several of the different convenience stores with EV charging along that key I-70 corridor or I-135 corridor. We as in the municipal utilities, we are not deploying, certainly not fast charging stations. The only times that we've deployed any sort of EV charging has been as it stems from there was a federal program that came down after VW maybe misrepresented its emissions, and so there was a push to send some of that money out to the states to encourage EV deployment. And so there were some like lower level chargers that were installed as a result of that money, but it was a kind of a mandate that came down from the federal government with that. And that is the only, and I think there was literally a handful of chargers that were installed. But again, that was coming down as a result of directive from the federal government. Otherwise, municipal utilities aren't in the business of installing EV charging stations. We're in the business of growing our communities, and we're in the business of growing the businesses that are in our communities, and we think that's really important. But I have to say, one of the provisions in the bill, and Representative Clays, you've asked this question of the last two conferees, is there anything that in this bill that would preclude or disincent EV build out? And I believe that there is, and that is lines 27 through 29, any costs or expenses incurred by the retail electric supplier, which would be the municipal utility, to construct, own, install, operate, maintain any fast charging station shall not be included in the electric utilities rate base. Well, what happens when the federal government, or maybe even the state government, but when there is a mandate, not just money thrown around as an incentive, but when there is a mandate for us to deploy? Under this bill, we have no way to recover those costs, but those costs were not costs that we chose to make. They were costs brought upon us. And so that's one of the reasons why we do strongly support the 5-year sunset, because looking back at where EVs were 5 years ago, the horizon looked very strong and up. And not to say that the horizon is not going to be that way 5 years from now, but that's not how it looks right now. We've all seen the historic write-downs that have happened by our domestic manufacturers, which is unfortunate for all of those jobs and employees and working on those lines. But let's maybe take that 5 years, see what the marketplace looks like, and then revisit this policy that doesn't allow us to recover a cost or any expense if there is a federal mandate. And so I think that's one of the reasons why KMU is neutral. We are a proponent of anything to grow our communities and to help provide the most low-cost, reliable, and affordable rates. And certainly having more EV charging and more cars in our communities charging on our system is great, or charging through convenience stores that work with our system. That's great. But if we are required to deploy, then that's where the concern comes in. So that's why we're a proponent of that 5-year review or sunset. So I'm happy to answer any questions at any time.
Kimberly, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Thompson.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. New president in less than 5 years, everything could change. Everything does change. I mean, just look what just happened. And it seems to me, and it sounds like the previous conferee would indicate, that a lot of the growth that we're seeing in the EV charging is from people like Tesla, who have an incentive to grow those EV charging stations. But from your standpoint, from Evergy's standpoint, economically, it doesn't sound like it makes a whole lot of sense unless you can recover some costs.
For the municipal utilities, we are governed by our city councils or our Board of Public Utilities. So, you know, our rates and whatnot are all set forth by them, and they are only going to allow us to make the most prudent decisions that make the most sense for, again, providing that most reliable, safe, and low-cost system to our customers. And that brings me back to one point that Representative Clays, you also asked about kind of remedies or penalties. So if there was a situation where the municipal utilities were not providing that non-discriminatory cost to any customer, first step is immediately go to your most, like the closest form of government to you, which is the entity that regulates the utility, and that is the city council. So the first remedy would be to the city council to explain the situation, to have the council work through that situation. Of course, they're going to be deferential to a business operating locally in that community. And then if a remedy didn't come about as a result of those conversations, then I'm sure that there would be some sort of legal remedy that could be the next step. But that is certainly the first step for a municipally owned utility who doesn't have a profit motive.
Any other, Senator Clays?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for interpreting my terribly worded questions and understanding it, because you're the first one that got that. I was putting together my own term, rate-based user, and what I meant was you being able to recover the cost through all of the users, and so I think you must have caught that. But one thing I was looking at one time was Georgia's model, which is that if there is an empty spot, nobody is getting it after a certain amount of time. Now, your example was, well, what if we have a mandate? You know, no, I don't like mandates, but maybe your users, want to do something like that, but they want to share it. Like you said, have everybody participate, and especially since you're a co-op, it kind of seems a little bit different. Like there's no investor part there, and I feel like if there's no, if Triplet isn't coming in there or somebody else isn't coming in there, and you want to put one there, but you want to be able to, share that cost, do you think there should be a carve out for something like that after some time period, or where no one is taking up that space, and you feel like your community needs something like that?
No, I think that's a really great question, Senator Clays. I know as part of KPP Energy, which is the conglomeration of municipal utilities, largely in the south central portion of the state. They have done extensive studies on EV charging, and not so much for them to deploy, because the preference is always going to be for a private company to come in and deploy, but what does that look like? And I think the studies have been done in the last couple of years. For municipal utilities, they're sizable investments, and so we have to have really strong justification, financial justification and rationale to make those investment decisions. And at this time, in some of our communities, that hasn't penciled out, but certainly there was some allure to the federal money that was potentially going to be made available for EV deployment, and if some of that could have flown into our communities, that probably would have been helpful to advance that deployment. But otherwise, it's largely, we're really focused on that public-private partnership. Municipal utilities have a different business model than the electric co-ops and Evergy, so I certainly wouldn't want my comments to be reflective of what it is that they may say.
Okay. Kimberly, thank you.
Thank you.
I take more questions, but I always put Joseph off, and it's time for him to come up here. Joseph Astra, Consumer Council, which is Citizens Ratepayer Board. Joseph?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'll be quick. A lot of the comments that I wrote in my written comments have been addressed here, but our kind of focus was, this is a policy call for this body to decide upon and how they want to help foster this growing market. We do make reference to that previous KCC docket and our positions there. We stood opposed to allowing costs to be passed on to ratepayers for this essentially a private market endeavor. And so the commission kind of, came up with a solution there that if you're able to show and provide a specific need for the utility to step in to provide for this market, then that would be allowable. And so I think that was worth some consideration before, making a blanket prohibition on that, because if it is the policy to promote EV charging and develop it like gas stations we see today, we think this bill would go a ways towards promoting that. We do point out the issues with underserved and rural communities that's been kind of gone over here. And so in addition to the discussions about a sunset provision, we also offered up the potential to exempt cooperatives and municipalities who have a more local connection to the needs and maybe more in tune with the appropriateness of recovering costs from utility ratepayers to supply what the free market cannot. And so, a lot of considerations that go into that we wanted to bring to this committee's attention. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joseph, very much. Okay, we've got neutral written, which is Justin Grady, Director of Utilities Division, Kansas Corporation Commission, that's in your file. Is there any other proponents, opponents, or neutral testimony? That's no other that's been submitted at this time. So is there any other testimony? I wasn't going to allow it if there was, so no. Fiscal note for SB 380 is in your folder, and at this point, we'll close SB 380. And without that, we're due on the floor, so meeting adjourned. Thank you.